All right, friends, good morning. Welcome to our RISE training for the administration of RISE summative assessments. I am Elise Fry, the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. I'm joined today by a few colleagues from USBE as well as some representatives from CAI, our vendor for RISE. They will be offering support by monitoring the chat and responding to other items if needed as we go through our information today. Just know that this training is being recorded and will be posted on our assessment YouTube channel in the next few days. I am hopeful that I will be able to share that recording link with you at next week's AD meeting. I will also work with Emily, our support specialist, to share the slide deck with you through Midas so that you have a PDF of these slides if you registered. If you aren't familiar with my trainings, I do build in question breaks as we transition between topics, but you're welcome to drop questions in the chat at any time, and we can address those as they come in. We also tend to hang out online at the very end of the training for a bit as well, if that's more your vibe or you have some questions that are a little more nuanced to your specific LEA or situation. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So if you're already familiar with RISE, very little is different this year other than some cosmetic updates to what is the secure browser, like that's what students will use, as well as in Tide. However, if you've been using benchmark modules or interim assessments or the training test this year, you've actually already seen those visual changes. But today we're going to look in depth at the RISE portal, its resources, how to administer summative tests, as well as the test appeals process and data cleanup, which as LEA users, you actually have the responsibility to monitor and manage as we go through this the process. We will also be reviewing remote administration guidance for those students who are receiving all of their instruction in a remote setting, but have also elected to take their tests in a remote setting. Hopefully, by the end of today's training, you feel confident enough to train other users in your LEA and provide any support that they might need as you go throughout your testing this spring. So here's a little reminder for the availability of the assessments, but this information is also included in the Assessment Director Resource Guide. Training tests are always available and should be used frequently. The benchmark modules and interim assessments are currently open and will remain open through the dates that are listed here, but I do want to point out that the interim assessments need to be completed and submitted by the end of the day on February 27th, and that's just a couple of weeks away. Because expired interim tests, they're not going to be able to be reopened after this date, and no interim assessments can be started after that date. Okay, the benchmarks remain available though through the end of your school year for most, if not all of you. Mid-year summative tests are also well underway. Many of you have already completed those as well if they were eligible for your students. Any incomplete mid-year summative tests though are going to force complete if they are not submitted by students on or before February 27th as well. For spring summative, LEAs have 8 weeks within the window to complete testing. You shouldn't be testing the last week of your school year because there's many activities, interruptions, just other unintended circumstances which tend to creep up. So just take that into consideration as you are setting your testing dates. You'll actually need to have USBE approval to test your last week of school if that ends up being needed. And if that is the case, you can email Scott Raskelly, our testing and data coordinator, should you need to adjust that window to include part of the last week of your school year. Okay. You should already be registered for portal updates, but if you're not, you'll want to do that just so that you're receiving any immediate updated information for outages or updated resources, things like that. The secure browser is required to be installed on all student devices for the administration of summative assessments. Instructions for installation are included in the technology resources link that's found under the initial resources section of the RISE portal. We're going to look at these resources more closely here in a little bit, but make sure you refer to the supported browsers that are listed here before you make any updates to a system or device. There are also troubleshooting guides for various operating systems in the technology resources provided on the portal. But if you have any issues with the secure browser on a device, you'll want to either reach out to your LEA technology specialist or also the RISE help desk is willing to help. We also recommend also not using the auto update option for devices because it doesn't always ensure that the operating system is going to be supported. So keep that in mind. When it comes to preparing for summative administration, we recommend working with students to complete a training test in each of the content areas they will be expected to test. Some ask what the difference is between a training test and a benchmark module. Training tests are just one of the very best ways to familiarize students and ourselves with the functionality of the system itself, because it provides various item types, administration procedures, as well as the global tools in a really low stakes environment. It allows you to ensure local technology configurations are validated and ensure that summative assessments can even be administered. Know though that these are grade banded. So the same questions are used for grades 3 through 5 and then 6 through 8. So because of this, they're certainly not intended to show proficiency toward a standard. Okay, with the training tests, students can familiarize themselves with the global tools so they can play with all the things and push all the buttons and it won't matter. Okay, teachers can work through items with their students, which wouldn't be an allowable practice with the benchmark modules. Okay, it's also good to give training tests in all content areas because some of the components are more content specific, like the calculator or the lack thereof in some situations. Okay. Just as we've done the last couple of years with remote testing, to complete a training test just prior to your actual summative test is still encouraged because it allows you one more chance to ensure teachers and students, as well as their devices, are ready to go. Okay, with remote testing, it will also provide you one more opportunity to use the communication tools with your students prior to beginning your summative test session if you're testing in that remote situation. There is far too much truth to this little comment than I care to admit, and we hear about it more often than you might think. So with more exposure to the system, we can help to alleviate some of this concern. Okay. I see in the chat, if a student took a training test in a subject during the interim, do they need to take the training test again? It's always great, Christy, to have them take it as many times as you would like them to take it. If you are testing remotely, it is a requirement. The training tests are provided on the RISE portal and they don't require any login, but I do recommend practicing a training test with the login credentials just so that students, especially our younger students, get the feel for the process. Here you can see the two different types of training tests. The training tests option is public with a guest login option. It's very simple. It doesn't require a proctor. You just click the button. This is great for teachers and staff to familiarize themselves with what the platform looks like and the functions. If they might be new or maybe they don't work in a tested content area but are going to be asked to proctor a test this season. It can be used as an informative tool for parents as well if there's any questions about what the system might look like. The test administration option, though, allows you to administer a training test in a test session that more mirrors the RISE process, which requires SSID login credentials for the student, a valid session ID provided by the proctor, and the secure browser. These are far more useful when prepping for test administration because if you've been taking advantage of the interim assessments or the benchmark modules, you've been able to practice this login process as well, okay? This format also allows students completing their RISE assessments remotely to practice using those communication tools within the system with their proctor. Once you've accessed your training test, you'll need to select your grade level as well as the content of the training test you wish to take. As mentioned before, these are banded. The content is not single grade specific, okay? The purpose is to become familiar with the system itself, the item types, and the tools provided. So it's really, really important to help students and your teachers understand that the content mastery or knowing the correct answer on these isn't necessarily the purpose of the training test. The purpose of this is to build familiarity with the system and its tools. Question in the chat, do we need two proctors for training tests when they log in with their SSIDs? Actually, that's not a requirement, but you are welcome to do that, especially with your younger students. Again, if you anticipate they need extra support with the login process itself, you're absolutely welcome to do that. It also will provide you with that opportunity to just kind of test out your two proctor situation, but it is not required with a training test. Yep, no problem. If you are using the system to mirror summative administration, you're also then able to verify accommodations that have been set for students and ensure that resources are applied and working correctly for students who have those. This is incredibly important if you have students who are using Braille. Training tests are also provided with Spanish adaptive functionality for our math and science assessments. When this functionality is selected on the training test, students will be able to toggle between the content presented both in Spanish and then in English using the Change Languages tool that's provided in the upper right corner with the other tools. Guidance for how to access this functionality can also be found in the TAM. If this presentation setting, though, isn't changed, the Spanish adaptive functionality is not going to be enabled for the student on the training test. Okay. I should also note here that this is not how to set it for summative administration. This is for the training test only. We're going to get to the summative setting a little bit later. Really quickly, do we have any questions that would relate to RISE availability or the training tests or the secure browser? Training tests are required for all students testing remote. Yes, Stacy, they are required. Any other questions before we move on to other resources within the RISE system itself? Okay. So now we're going to look at the other RISE resources and systems available to you in the RISE portal. This is just a quick overview of each of those separate sections. You'll see there are 5 different tabs to choose from, along with just an abbreviated version of what you'll find or be able to do in each of those sections. We're not going to look at benchmark module preview today, though, because we are focusing today on summative administration. But if that's something you're interested in learning more about, you can review the benchmark and interim administration training that was held back in August. Its recording is posted on our YouTube channel if that's something that you'd like to learn more about if you weren't able to attend that one previously. We're going to start with resources at the top. The resources tab houses the tech resources that I previously mentioned, as well as other helpful guides like the TIDE user guide, the TAM, as well as the RISE reporting guide. All 3 of those documents are helpful to use both before, during, and after testing. You can print sections of all of those to have hard copies available. Just understand these are always also available online. And just know that we also at USBE view them a little more organic in nature, so changes can happen at any time. Okay, so relying on the copy you printed at the beginning of the year, or even heaven forbid last year or the year before, is not going to have the most accurate or current information, even if it's just formatting updates or new screenshots. Okay, if there are great big changes, you will get the portal notification that I mentioned earlier. But just know that when that happens, the printed one that you've created now is no longer as accurate as it could be. To find these 3 helpful documents as well as others, you just select the user guide folder under Browse. Here's a TIDE user guide overview. So the TIDE user guide is really helpful before testing because it's where you will learn how to edit or modify any user accounts or user-defined rosters. Remember, though, no changes can be made to a system-defined roster because those are created with our Utrecht sync. However, you can create your own rosters for teachers who might be in like a co-teaching experience because the students are only going to roster to one of the teachers to begin with that they're originally assigned to. So it's nice to be able to create that user-defined roster if you want to add another teacher to be able to view some data. It's also nice if you're collecting data on a small group of students who may not be in the same class so that it's all just in one place. Other important information you'll find in the TIDE user guide is guidance on how to add accommodations, how to enter participation codes, as well as the test appeals process. Something to note, there is the approving of test appeals. It is only available to school administrators and LEA level users, so you'll want to make sure that you are watching for those. We will review that process later in the training, but know that that is one of your main responsibilities is to check those and kind of be monitoring them. Anyone administering summative tests should read and familiarize themselves with the appropriate sections in the TAM, which apply to their user role. Especially because reading the TAM scripts verbatim is still required for a summative assessment. Know that much of the required scripting is embedded now within the system, but not all of it. Okay. The TAM is also designed to allow for printing by specific user role. Teachers or proctors don't need to print the whole thing, just the sections that are applicable to them. The reporting guide helps give direction for interpreting scores, how to set up reports, as well as how to print student ISRs when the time comes. Because parents should be notified of their students' scores within 3 weeks of test completion. So when that window closes, if you haven't been printing these and sending them home to parents, or at the very least notifying them that ISRs have maybe even been uploaded to your SIS or LMS systems, that's definitely an issue that you'll want to resolve this year. You have 3 weeks to provide reports once testing is complete to parents. Now that we've covered the resources, we're going to skip down to Tide. When you first select that Tide option, you are going to be prompted to log in with your credentials. And once you've done that, the landing page is going to look like this. The Tide homepage does look a little different from years past. It's had a bit of a facelift, as you've probably noticed, but it still reflects the stages of the testing process. So it starts with preparing for testing, then administering in the middle, and then the after testing is off to the right. Note that after testing section, though, is for LEA level users only. So if you're a teacher or a testing coordinator, you're actually only going to see the first orange and green sections, okay? Note that appeals requests as well, we're going to look at these a little bit later, but if you have a little number other than 0 in that little blue circle, that means that you have appeals to review. So make sure you're watching for those. The Tide homepage also houses the waffle menu for navigating to other areas in the top left, as well as the Secure File Center in the top right. Permissions for accessing the data and viewing other information in Tide is determined by your user role, okay? There are 6 different user roles that are available in Tide, and those 6 roles have different permissions associated with them. Most of you in this training have an LEA administrator role or maybe an LRV, like a report viewer. This screenshot, though, is from the Tide user guide, and it gives you an idea of how those permissions break down. You can see those user abbreviations across the top of the table in blue. For example, an LEA administrator can perform tasks that are not available to a teacher level user. You can also see here that LEA and school administrators are granted significantly more permissions than teachers or proctors. And these permissions also limit the scope of data access. So a district level user can work with data that relates to their district, their schools, or even an individual teacher within their LEA, whereas a school level user can only work with or view data pertaining to their individual school or the ones that are assigned to their rosters if they're a teacher. Is this where parental exclusions are submitted? No, Grant, that will come later. When you need to access secure documents, the student data file, those are going to be, or anything that's been previously exported from Tide or RISE reporting, you can just click on the Secure File Center button at the top right in the banner, and from there, you can either download or archive or export any of those previously downloaded files. Just know that they also have an expiration on them, so there will come a time when they're no longer there, but you can always re-download them to your Secure File Center if you need them. So now we're going to look at each of the sections in Tide individually, and we're going to start with preparing for testing, which is an orange section, that little orange bar on the side. Here you can view and edit user accounts as well as add new users. I went into a lot of detail on how to add users in the fall training, so if you need a refresher, you can either review that recording or you can go through the Tide user guide for guidance on how to add or remove users in Tide. The student menu is where you can access and edit student accounts, like adding accommodations and viewing various reports or creating those. We're going to take some time now, though, and look closely on how to add accommodations to students' settings. So to access a student record to update those settings, you're going to need to search for the student and then use the little 3-dot kebab menu to edit them. Notice you can search by school, grade, SSID, your LEA ID or name, along with additional criteria. You don't need all of it. You can almost just do it with the SSID, okay? To edit this, you will need to then access the Edit Student menu from the 3-dot kebab menu to the left of the student's information. Notice you can also click right to the Edit Test Settings from this drop-down, which is kind of nice. This is a demo student. It gives you an idea of what an individual student record might look like at the very top. The student information used to search defaults to your viewable screen, and then using the tabs across the top, you can also choose to view the test settings and tools, their participation, what rosters they're on, as well as any testing history. I know it's small print, but when you select that test setting and tools tab from the top, or the edit test setting pencil from that kebab menu, a series of drop-down menus and toggle switches are going to become viewable for making changes to a student's first benchmark parental exclusion status. So that's if they were had the form signed to include benchmarks as well. This is not the summative parental exclusion. This is one only for benchmarks. It also is going to allow you to make any changes to assistive tools or presentation modifications like Braille or ASL, or if they have a print on request requirement. Okay, any of those accommodations that are outlined in a student's IEP or their 504 documents, just know that accommodations are not uploaded through Scram or through Utrex. Okay, they are taken care of manually through this section. There's also an export option which pulls the current test tool settings from your selected students and exports those settings into an Excel sheet that's pre-formatted to import back into Tide. This Excel export allows for quicker edits because you can then re-upload it when changing those test settings, and it's just accessed from the View, Edit, Export Student Tide task. To do this, you'll just first download the template, which will get the file that you need to edit in the format that is required. But please note that this export feature does not take place of Tide forms. We're actually going to discuss those a little bit later. Okay, so forms are the ones where you have to have USBE approval. The ones that don't require that are the ones you can use for this upload. Users are only able to upload changes to student test settings that are already editable directly in Tide. So those are the ones we looked at on the previous slide. Users can't upload test settings for accommodations or settings which are going to require, again, that USBE approval with Tide forms. Okay, the steps for uploading that are pretty straightforward. Once you get the file edited with the appropriate information, you'll upload it to Tide where you can preview it and then validate it. As long as there are no errors, you'll just hit through the blue buttons and it confirms on the last step that it's been uploaded if you choose to use that functionality. As another really important note, this is also where you can set the Spanish adaptive feature for the summative assessment. We looked at it for the training test, which you do right in the training test section, but this is where you set it for the summative assessment. The Spanish adaptive functionality is currently provided for math and science summative assessments. Yes, that means that this functionality is not available for ELA or writing components. If you have any questions, though, regarding students with accommodations or the accommodations themselves, you are welcome to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist who works with RISE. Her email address is also going to appear in just a couple of slides, so you can take note of that if you need to. Summative parental exclusion, Brian, we will get there. It's later. This part isn't going to show up in Tide, but I wanted to bring attention to what it looks like for students in the testing environment. As a reminder, USBE has developed recommendations for students who would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version of the summative assessment. It's important to note, though, that the decision ultimately needs to be determined by the LEA's language services team with support of the parent and student preference. Okay, guidance for who this functionality is most appropriate for is provided in the TAM. Look on page 41. As a note here, because it has happened every year since this functionality became available, students need to have had experience with a training test in the Spanish adaptive environment prior to summative administration. We've invalidated many tests each year since this functionality's inception, which were taken with the inappropriate language setting because either A, the guidance in the TAM for who may qualify wasn't followed, or guidance was partially followed, but the student never actually experienced the testing environment with the language setting and then asked for it to be changed back to English only. Okay, this makes more work for you and is a far more frustrating testing experience for students. So please make sure this is something you are paying attention to and that you are following the guidance outlined. If you have any students who require the use for assistive technology or a scribe, you will need to make a request to USBE through Tide using the forms functionality. This will alert USBE and require approval. And to do that, you click on forms in that orange section and click submit forms. On the next page, select the type of form that you wish to submit. For assistive technology requests, you have to complete the form detailing the demographic information of the school and detail the requirement of the accommodation itself. And just know here that all sections of the form do have to be completed. Okay. Once you've completed that, you will also have to agree that the accommodations that you have documented are used regularly and with fidelity in class instruction, okay, and that it's been attempted in training tests to ensure that it functions as expected for the student. Upon submission, a tracking identifier is going to be provided for you. It's recommended, though, that you save this identifier just to easily track the status of your accommodation request. And just know that once it's submitted, requests cannot be edited or changed. Describe include STT for remote testing. Delray, that's a question you'll have to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm with. The request is then going to be reviewed by USBE staff, and upon approval, USBE staff will enable the requested accommodations in Tide. Any of the specific accommodation request questions need to go to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist, and her email address is here on this slide. You can take note of it, but again, if you have registered in Midas, these slides will be provided for you afterward, and you can log back into Midas and they'll be linked there for you, and you can download them. Once you submit those requests, you can also review them. So on the Tide dashboard, you're going to click on Manage Forms in the Preparing for Testing group there. On the next page, the View and Edit Forms search box is displayed. Fields that have that little asterisk are the ones that are required to be filled in, and you just select and input any of the relevant search settings based on your previously submitted accommodation form and click Search. The status of the forms matching that selected search area are then going to be displayed. So these can fall into one of three categories. They can be submitted, rejected, or approved. The Manage Form page provides guidance on what each of these means. And this step is optional, but if you want to view further details about the request, you can click on the little pencil icon to the left of the applicable form. And again, if you have any questions regarding these form requests, you can reach out to Jessica with any of those questions, and she's happy to help you. So back up at the top of a student record, the Rosters tab will show you which roster names and teachers that students are currently enrolled with as well. The students menu is also where you can create the frequency distribution report. This report is only available at the LEA or the school level, but it is going to show you the number of students in a specific category. Again, once you generate one of these reports, it's going to be sent to your secure file center that was up at the top right of your Tide landing page. So we've covered the first three bullet points. So now for the last two reports available under the students menu, they are the student arrivals report, which you can use to show when students were added to your organization. And there's also the student departures report, which you can use to show when students were removed from your organization. So now onto rosters specifically. The rosters tab allows you to search pre-existing rosters, or you can also create or edit or delete any user-defined rosters that were created by users in your LEA. You can also view the system-defined rosters that are loaded through UTrex. Remember, though, that those system-defined rosters cannot be edited because of the UTrex sync. If you are experiencing rostering issues, please reach out to our assessment data specialist, Maureen Rushing. Just remember, though, it's important to ensure teachers who are testing have the correct students on their rosters prior to the actual test date. So that if a teacher elects just to print testing tickets, they will have that accurate information. Maureen and I have already gotten lots of questions about teachers either still not having an account in RISE or also incorrect students rostering them into Tide, which is great because students aren't necessarily testing right now. And so this is when we love to have those questions and iron out those issues, because it's better to do it now than to try to do it the morning that a student is trying to test and they're unable to. So this is, again, a great time to go in and verify those user accounts as well as the rosters. Participation codes is the next menu item we are going to look at. So those of you who are asking about parental exclusions for summative tests, this is where we're going to do that. Explain arrival and departure report purpose. Christine, it just is going to show you enrollment dates of when students have enrolled or when they have left. It's a newer functional report that you can choose to use or not, but that is their purpose. Does that help? I'm hoping so. Okay, so participation codes is again the next menu item we're going to look at. These are used by USBE for summative tests. The only exception to this is the parental exclusion participation code, which can be entered for any assessment, not just summative. Okay, we talked about parental exclusions for the benchmark modules already because those are handled through the managing students or test setting tools menu. These ones are the ones for your summative tests. So to update a student's participation codes, you're going to search for students using the available filters. The search results table shows students who match the search criteria that you have entered, and the participation codes column lists any that have already been assigned to that student. But to add a code, you'll select the edit option from that little three-dot kebab menu for the student whose participation code you need to update. To edit that non-participation code, the page will appear and you'll see the student information at the top, and you can edit those codes using the drop-down menus available for each test that the student is eligible to take. So as a note here, if a student doesn't appear on a roster, you may actually want to check the parental exclusion status for that student because the applied code could hide them from appearing on a roster if they're not eligible to take it due to parental exclusion. Okay, it's also important to note here that the new participation codes are listed, so you can see the accommodation codes with 210, 211, 212. We also have the 213 and 214 that are there. There's also a couple here that, because of the scrolling, aren't listed, where it might be invalidated due to student testing ethics issue or a proctor testing ethics issue. Okay. So that is where you will add participation codes for parental exclusion or anything else, whether the student is absent, has a medical emergency, things like that. Are there questions on the RISE resources themselves or anything specific that you might have for rostering or participation codes? Please know that with accommodations, Jessica is not able to be with us today, so you might want to send her an email if you have something specific there. But Maureen is online and is happy to respond to any rostering questions. Or if you have something specific to participation codes, I can respond to those as well right now.
Christine had a question. She explained it.
Oh, and I did that one. It's just the dates.
Okay.
Yep, it's just dates. It's a new one that RISE added. I think it was added just this year. Those two, Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but those two reports were new, and it just gives you dates of when they have enrolled or when they have exited.
And you don't have to fill out those start date to get.
Yeah, you just get to generate it. What info do you need from us for when a teacher's not showing up under the system defined? Brian, if a teacher's not showing up, really all we need is either their name or their cactus, and we can look into why it's happening. I will say 9 times out of 10, it's because the teacher doesn't actually have an account, or they have an account, but their cactus number is either incorrect or not listed. So those are a couple of things that you can troubleshoot on your side before reaching out to USBE as well. If changes are made to UTREX, how long does it take to update the rosters for RISE? 24 to 48 hours. Any other questions before we move on to the testing experience itself? All right, then moving forward, before you conduct any testing, I would recommend going through this little checklist here just to ensure that all of your bases are covered. If you have questions, though, regarding the standard test administration and testing ethics policy training, you can reach out to Scott Ross-Kelly, our test administration and data coordinator, and he can help answer any questions there. You'll want to review the TAM to make sure you have your scripting ready and ensure that devices that students will be using are in working order. Know that this includes keyboards, computer mice, headphones. I mentioned headphones because with the addition of more embedded scripting, students will want those headphones ready and available before they even enter the testing environment, okay? Note that not all scripting is embedded. So just pay close attention to the guidance in the TAM because reading some testing scripting is required, but most of it is embedded, but students will have to have headphones to be able to hear that before the test even starts. Make sure students take a training test at some point prior to administering a test. Check your rosters, print your testing tickets if you plan to use those. Make sure students who require accommodations have those settings applied. Take into account classroom location as well as environment. You want to make sure that you eliminate distracting noises. As a note here, do not play music during standardized assessments. You will need to cover and remove any materials that could provide hints or answers to students. If possible, you may even want to arrange the room in such a way that it prevents students from viewing others' computer screens if at all possible. You'll also need to notify students of your local electronic device policy prior to administration because no secondary devices are allowed during testing. Electronic devices would include, but are not limited to, things like cell phones, smartphones, smartwatches, meta glasses, anything with internet capability, okay? The only exception to this is students who may use a device to monitor health situations like diabetes for their insulin. If you have questions regarding students who require that accommodation, again, reach out to Jessica with any questions or concerns. If you have elected to use testing tickets, there are a few places you can access them. But honestly, for me, the print test tickets option in that green administering test section is by far the easiest place. I prefer to print from roster as it's already has my students assigned to me and then to the appropriate teachers. So you just fill out the appropriate information from the roster, which needs printed, and then just hit the search button. From there, you'll be able to select any that you wish to print test tickets for, and then the printer icon will become available. These can be printed one roster name at a time, or you can select all of some of the rosters. The print icon, which appears grayed out on this screenshot, is going to illuminate for selection as soon as at least one roster has been selected for printing. So now that we've prepped for testing, we are going to move on to testing progress and being able to monitor that. You may notice here that admin users have more options on this menu, as well as the option to make test appeal requests, and we're going to go over that a little bit later. So we're going to start with the functionality which allows you to actively monitor testing through the testing windows. So some of these options are new from last year, but all of these options allow you to generate various reports that provide information about a test administration's progress. So there's the Plan and Manage testing report, which details a student's testing opportunities as well as the status of each of those opportunities. The Test Session Status Report displays status reports of active and inactive test sessions that are currently happening, okay? The participation search by SSID allows you to enter SSIDs manually or by upload for individual student data. The test completion rates report is going to summarize the number and percentage of students who have started or completed a test. The test status code report displays all of the participation codes for test administration. The test progress summary displays charts with data from test completion rates for district level users as well as school level data. And then the test progress summary is going to chart the data of test completion rates, again, for the district or the school. I'm going to go over a couple of these with you, but if there's an option that you'd like to know more about, details can be found in the Rise Tide user guide, or you can reach out to me individually and I can help you with those. But you can create your own plan and manage testing report with your own specific search criteria. This is going to allow users to generate very customizable participation reports just to show students' progress throughout the testing process. So there's two different ways to do this. There's the basic search, which this series of slides walks you through. You just need to fill out your LEA and school information specific to your search. And there's also the advanced search. So by zooming in a bit, you can see it provides you with the option to select by have or have not, completed or not completed, paused, checking close to expired, which those of you who are currently in the middle of interim administrations, this is a great one to be looking for so that you don't have to do a test appeal. Checking those ones that are close to expired so you can get those students in and get them completed. You can also search by SSID and session ID, as well as within a specific date range. Another of these I want to chat about is the test completion rates report, that fourth one down. When searching for this report criteria, you're going to start with the report type. So for example, I can search from state completion rates or LEA completion rates or school completion rates. So your role, though, is going to determine how many report types you have access to. You're not going to have the state completion rate ones that I do. You'll then select the test. You should have benchmark, interim, and summative available. The administration year cannot be changed, but then under test name, you can search by content, grade, and then select multiple options. This report is going to summarize the number and percentage of students who have started or completed a test. Okay. Also note that this information is only available as an Excel export. Okay. These items are all of the columns which are going to appear in this report. So you'll see tests, LEA information, students, how many have started, how many have completed, and so on. Pretty informative for you, and just a nice quick at a glance of what's been done and what has been started. So now we're going to move to actual test administration. So as a reminder, the tab is located in the resources section, but to open a test, you will need to select test administration system option, that fourth tab down, that fourth button. These are the same 6 steps for any RISE test. It doesn't matter if it's summative or a benchmark or an interim. If teachers have administered benchmark modules or interim assessments, this is not going to look too different. Okay. For summative testing, 2 proctors are best for test security. They do not need to be certified teachers, but they do need to have gone through the appropriate testing ethics training. Okay. For students testing in person, at least one proctor should always be in the room with students, while the other could be roaming amongst all testing areas or like between 2 or 3 classrooms within a building. For students testing remotely, however, the 2 proctors must be in the same physical location. They need to be in the very same room for ease of communication, as well as for the sharing of the administration device. Okay, be sure to have any materials ready, like testing tickets, headphones, scripting, scratch paper. Okay, having all of those things ready is just going to provide the least amount of disruption to the actual administration itself. So now we're going to look step by step through the process. The first step in administering any test is to create a testing session, and this should be done fewer than 20 minutes prior to the start of the test in order to prevent the system from timing out on you if you are testing in person. Okay. The list of students in the session is going to generate automatically when the students log in. So when you first log in and select a test type, the test selection window is going to automatically appear so you can create that session. And in our continued effort to prevent the misadministrations of any summative assessments, my favorite feature is this important box. It says, you are about to select a summative test. Students have only one opportunity to take this test. Click OK to continue. And if you really want to administer this type, please type summative. While we had exactly 0 misadministrations of summative assessments a couple of years ago, thanks to the addition of this feature, there have been a small number of teachers who have reverted back to autopilot practices recently in that they're not actually reading before they click or act. So just another friendly reminder here that when a teacher administers a summative test in error and they've come to you with full remorse and begging for it to be reset, it's imperative to understand that they've not just clicked OK or inadvertently selected the wrong test. They've actually had to cognitively type summative in a box, agreeing that they understand students can only take it one time. Okay. All assessments in the test selection window are color-coded. Summative ones are blue. The available tests are organized into categories as shown here on the screen, and you can click the plus sign button next to a category name to view the tests in that category more accurately, to open specific sessions or specific grades or subject areas. Okay, to create a test session, you select the test or tests that you wish to administer, and those are then going to populate in the test selected box on the right. If you misselect anything, you can clear it with the little garbage can or click the gray X next to an individual test to remove it. Okay, then you're going to click the Start RISE Live Test Session button to open that session. Once you click that Start RISE Live Test Session button, the system is going to automatically generate a session ID. And that session ID will appear at the top of the teacher interface along with a stop button. That session ID is what needs to be provided to students for them to log in further into the testing platform, okay? Most teachers choose to write it onto the board or even project it onto their board. If you choose to provide students with the information on paper, though, know that it needs to be securely destroyed when the session is complete. When students start signing into the session, an approvals button is going to appear. Once you approve sessions for testing, the test session table is going to start to populate in the center, displaying all of the students' testing and their progress. The approval spot is really the most important piece to be aware of. If you notice, there's a little red one next to it, and that tells me I have one student waiting for approval. You'll watch that number increase as students get logged into the secure browser. Just know they can't access any test questions until you hit that approval button. So this is especially important for the Math 6 test because once students finish the first segment, they actually are going to be required to sign back into the second portion of the test, which requires another approval on your part. Okay. Now we're going to look at the TDS banner just in its entirety. In the banner at the top of the window, you are going to see a set of buttons and your username. So the student lookup tab is to search for students' login information and a way to verify that their credentials are correct. You can click approve requests to view any listing of students if they have print requests, if that's needed. You can click print session if you want to print like a screenshot of this particular screen. The help guide link in the upper right allows you to access additional information about the test administration interface if you ever need it. And you can click the logout button under your account to exit the site entirely. If a student is having trouble logging in, use that student lookup feature to verify their login credentials are actually correct. So you can either use the quick search or the advanced search option to view the information entered for the student in TIDE. With quick search, you just simply enter the student's SSID and hit submit. Advanced search is going to allow you to narrow your search using several filters, including your LEA, your school, the grade, first name, last name, things like that. When using either the quick search or advanced search, though, if the search results in any matches at all, the information is going to appear at the bottom of the window. If there's no match, you're going to see an error message. If you see the student you are looking for, you can click that little eyeball button next to the student's name and the screen will then display the student's information. Note that the information displayed is going to vary slightly than what you see here, but it is going to provide the information you need just to verify that that's what, in fact, the student was typing into the computer. If there are no issues to take care of, though, you can begin approving student entry. It's just really important that you pay attention to the test name prior to approval, just to be sure that students have selected the appropriate test. To approve students for testing, you can click the checkboxes one at a time, or you can approve all of the students at the top. You can ensure that the Spanish setting, as well as any other accommodations, have been set for students by clicking the little I and then scrolling to the presentation section just to confirm that if you want to check before they begin. And even though you can approve all students at the same time, just know that students actually need to be individually denied entry to a test session. So people have asked, like, why would you even deny a student entry? Things to think about would be if the student's not supposed to actually enter that particular session, or maybe if the student's demographic information is correct, or maybe their required accommodations aren't set, things like that. You could deny them before they even enter, go back and fix those settings before they even re-enter the testing environment. Just know that if you deny a student entry into a test session, it's not going to prevent other students from beginning their tests. Okay, or if you deny entry and error, the student can just start the login process over and you'll be able to reapprove them for entry. If the student's test settings are incorrect, they do have to be updated in TIDE, though, before the student can take the test. So this is actually where the second proctor also comes in handy, because one proctor can continue to support students as they're entering the testing environment, while the other can work on troubleshooting access for the students whose settings were incorrect. Verifying these things to begin with could also help cut down on the number of test appeals that are being submitted for your approval later. Note that no settings can be changed while the student is actively testing. So once a student begins testing, settings like the language option can't be changed without resetting the test opportunity, okay? Updates to background color or font size are going to only take effect after the student logs out and then logs back in to resume testing. Once student tests log in and are approved for testing, proctors are going to monitor their status from the tables displayed on the screen. So there's the progress column, and it displays the student's progress through the items in the test. The test settings column is going to display either standard or custom. This column is going to then display custom if the student's test settings are different from the default to the test. And again, you can verify those settings by clicking the little eyeball. The actions column allows you to also pause a student's test or do any of the print on request functionality that might be needed for a student who has that listed on their IEP or 504 documentation. If TDS ever detects that a student could be having technical issues or require assistance, a test with potential issues table is actually going to appear above the tests without issue. Okay, a more info icon is going to then appear, and by hovering over that icon, it's going to display more information about what issue might be happening. If a student requests a printout through their print on request accommodation, a printer icon is going to appear in that actions column. The print on request feature is only available for students who require it per their IEP or 504 plan, okay? It is a testing impropriety to apply this restricted resource for a student who doesn't have it outlined or who doesn't need it, okay? If you have any questions about this, you can contact Jessica Wilhelm, or if you need to, you can also contact your school testing coordinator if your student needs that accommodation and it's just not there, so that they can get that applied. So students with this accommodation can request printouts of stimuli or items just depending on what their settings are. And when a student sends a print request, the printer button is going to appear again in that actions column, and you can click the button to view the request. If you click the check button to approve the request, a cover sheet containing the student's name and SSID is going to display in a new browser window. Know that no test content will ever display on your particular screen. You just click print, then OK, and then a new window is going to complete that print request. Okay, if you click the X button to deny it, nothing is going to print. But before approving the student's print request, just ensure that it will be sent to a printer that is monitored by staff who've been trained in test security, because all of those printed items are going to have to be securely stored and destroyed immediately following the testing session. The Approve Requests button allows you to view a list of every print request you've approved during the current session. If you want to print that list for your own records, you can do that by clicking the print button at the top. If you want to print a snapshot of your screen in its current view, you can click the print session button that's there at the top of the screen. This can be useful for tracking which students didn't complete their tests and might need to be scheduled for another session. So once you complete a session, you print this and it's going to show you which ones are done and which ones aren't. It also might be necessary, though, to set the page layout to landscape or adjust your margins in the print preview screen in order for everything to fit on one page. Just kind of know that that's a thing. Remember that any printouts, again, containing any personally identifiable student information do also need to be securely stored and then destroyed at the end of use. And this would count as one of those as well. You have two options within the test interface to pause or stop testing once it's begun. So you can pause an individual student's test or stop the entire session. To pause an individual test, you just click the pause button in the actions column for that particular student. When prompted, click OK to confirm that you want to pause that test. This option would be really appropriate if a student becomes ill or was called to the office and didn't pause the test on their own. In the event of an emergency, though, that requires all students to stop testing, like an evacuation drill, you can pause all students' tests at one time just by stopping the session. Okay, if you stop the session, every single in-progress test is going to be paused. And after stopping that session, you can just create a new test session and give them a new session ID when they can, so that they can resume testing if it's needed. If you forgot to log out before leaving the testing area, the session is going to close itself automatically after 20 minutes of inactivity on both the teacher computer as well as on student computers. And you would also then need to create a new session and provide a new session ID to resume testing if that occurs. In the event that you need to transfer the monitoring and management of your session from one computer to another, you can actually transfer the active test session from one device to another without stopping the session or even interrupting in-progress tests. This is really useful in scenarios where your computer malfunctions, or if your laptop battery is dying, or if you accidentally close the browser while a session is in progress, or maybe you're proctoring a remote session and need the other proctor to take over with another device. Please note that to transfer a test session, though, you do need to enter the active session ID. So the steps for this are: first, don't log out or stop the session. If you do, you're going to end up having to restart the session over again, okay? But when the session ID prompt appears, you'll enter the active session ID and just click enter. The administration site is then going to appear, which is going to then allow you to continue monitoring your students' progress on another device, and the test session on the previous computer or browser is going to automatically close, okay? This is not going to stop the session or pause the student tests. They aren't even going to realize that you did it if you ever have to. Upon completing a session, you'll just click the log out button in the upper right corner of the page. It is preferred that you log out only after stopping your active testing session, as logging out is going to cause, again, all in progress tests to be paused, and a confirmation message will appear asking you to confirm that you really want to exit the website and pause anything that's been in progress, okay? This scenario also occurs when you navigate to another website from the teacher interface. However, regardless of when or how you log out or navigate away from the test site, student data is not lost. Okay, if you need to access another site during a testing session, we just encourage you to open it in a separate browser window. This table presents some of the common issues that you or your students might encounter during a test session. I'm not going to go through them individually, but you can reference the slides on your own following the training. But just know there's even more detailed information and additional technical tips in the TAM if you have any troubleshooting with logging in or issues that might occur during a testing session. So with that, do we have any questions on generating testing tickets or monitoring testing through the test administration interface? For what it's worth, we're going to switch gears and move to the student experience after this. I'm not seeing anything, which can mean two things. I either covered it really well or you're bored. I'll take either one with a smile on my face, though. If something comes up, drop it in the chat and we can help you. We'll move on to the student experience then. So the secure browser student interface, you'll notice that the first name and the SSID are required for initial sign-in. Okay, test administrators are allowed to assist students with this login if it's needed. Students need to use the secure browser to access the test itself. This should be accessed, again, it probably goes without saying, but with a different device than the teacher is using to proctor the test, okay? The secure browser is designed to ensure test security by prohibiting students from accessing other programs or websites during testing. So your school's their technology coordinator is more responsible for ensuring that secure browser has been correctly installed on all devices. If you have questions about installation of the secure browser, again, you can contact your testing technology coordinator or even the Rice Help Desk if you need some extra support with that. Okay, after logging in, students will need to complete just a few more steps before they begin testing. Students will be asked to view and verify their personal information. If it's correct, they click yes. If the information is incorrect, please have them click no. You then just need to contact your school or district test coordinator and have the student's information updated and tied before the student attempts to log in again, or make sure they have the correct testing ticket. Okay, it's really important because some students have the same first and last names. The grade and the SSID also need to match, and we need to make sure the students are taking the correct test under the correct name. Once they've verified their information, they are going to enter the live session ID that's provided by the proctor. Again, many teachers choose to write this on the board or project it just for ease of viewing by the student, and then they don't have to print anything. If a student is having difficulty logging in, an error message or code might be displayed on the login screen. The most common errors occur when the student's first name and SSID don't match what's in the system, or when SSIDs are entered incorrectly. If the student receives an error message indicating that they've entered incorrect information in the first name or SSID fields, the teacher can use the student lookup tool to verify the student's information that we looked at earlier. Another common error occurs when students enter an incorrect session ID. If a student receives the message, the session is not available, that is just more related to the session ID itself. Odds are they made a numerical or alphabetical error when they were typing it in. Also make sure that there's no extra spaces or characters. I have seen numerous times where a student types in their first name and they hit the space bar after it, and then it doesn't let them log in. Or if a student has dual last names or a hyphenated last name, again, it should appear the very same as it does on the testing ticket. Okay. If a student receives an error message that a session has expired, just also again make sure that the student has entered the correct session ID for the current session that they are trying to enter, rather one that may have been done the day before or the class period before. On the Your Tests screen, students are going to see a list of their assigned tests for the test session. If the tests displayed are incorrect or the expected test isn't listed, students should then click the Back to Login button and talk to the proctor just to resolve the issue. If there are no errors, though, students can select the correct test and just wait for approval to proceed forward. Please note, though, that this screenshot is for a training test. Okay, so no, it's just going to look a little bit different for a summative test when you go to do that. Okay. After the test administrator has approved students for the test session, the students will select any accessibility preferences that they have, and they can then proceed through a series of functionality checks just to make sure that their device is functioning properly. They're going to test their audio. They need to select if they heard a voice or not. Okay. These checks are great because they allow for the headphones to also be tested before getting into the test itself. This is where you may even hear a student's computer announce it to the entire class, and that's probably because their headphone little plug, their little audio jack hasn't been pushed in all the way. It's a nice, good reminder to push it in all the way. But again, if students aren't hearing that voice, it's probably an issue with either the headphones themselves or the audio settings that are on the device that you can also check before they enter the testing session. Next, they can review information about the tools and navigation features that they have access to during the testing with instructions as well as a help screen. The test settings section allows students to view their current test settings. Okay, the additional testing information section is going to list any additional information that's necessary for students to know while they're in the testing session. The help guide section, it contains an overview of the testing site, like testing rules, information on the text to speech, print on request features, things like that. But just know that when students click the little Begin Test Now button, they are going to be shown the very first question of the test. Okay. Administering assessments to remote students does require some additional considerations above what would be encountered in the classroom setting. So this functionality that I'm going to talk about here for a little bit is only available for students who receive all of their instructions in a remote setting. So because of the nature of remote testing, completing a training test remotely with the teacher as the proctor is also required just prior to completing a training test remotely before you do the summative test, okay? That allows you to test the device with the student and the teacher before they open an actual summative test session, okay? Any scripting for these are also provided in the TAM. Okay, still required, but again, most of it is embedded. While completing a test, remote students are going to be able to communicate with proctors directly just by clicking on the icon at the bottom of their screen. We're going to review that with you in a bit if you're unfamiliar. Students will also not be able to see or communicate with other students during the administration of a remote test. But because of all of this, it's imperative to have a second secure way of communicating with students, like your LMS, just to communicate the test session ID prior to the session itself. So the remote administration method for RISE allows teachers and students to communicate both through text and video chat within the test delivery system itself. It also has capability for teachers to monitor students directly. So students will connect to the remote test session by using the secure browser, just like you saw with the general experience, okay? But with the remote feature, they do have to have a device, again, with working speakers, camera, microphone, just to ensure, again, the secure browser has been installed on those student devices. And then teachers are going to sign into the RISE administration site just as if they were testing in person. Okay. There should be no more than 10 students allocated to 2 proctors during a remote testing session, because actively proctoring that many students remotely is going to be challenging, okay? These 2 proctors need to be in the same room during testing sessions for ease of communication. This means that Zoom is not going to be allowable during testing. It's also much easier to troubleshoot any unforeseen technical issues if you're not attempting to do it via video conference or text messaging with your with your colleague for proctoring. For RISE, we also ask that you conduct, again, one or more training tests just prior to the beginning of your summative administration, just so that all users can ensure that the technology is working as expected and that accommodations are set and that all of those communication tools are functional. When you do this, you don't need to necessarily go through every single item and finish the training test. You just need to make sure everything is working as expected. As a reminder, no parents or siblings are permitted to be in the room with the students who are testing, and a quiet testing environment is still being enforced. Okay, meaning music isn't playing, television shouldn't be on in the background, things like that. While completing a test remotely, students are going to be able to communicate either through text or video chat with the proctors directly by using functionality, again, provided within the system. They're not using cell phones. They're not using a secondary device through Zoom. They are using the tools provided within the system. The system also requires that teachers monitor students directly using the Proctor dashboard features. I should note here that students will not, again, be able to see or communicate with other students during the administration of a remote test. Only the teacher or the proctor. Can Zoom be used before students log in to read required scripting and share the session ID? Yes, Ashley, that is when Zoom would be allowable. And then that device is either placed in another room or they log off of it with the device that they're using and log into the secure browser, which is actually preferred. Okay, perfect. This is your remote proctoring checklist, which is actually also provided in the RISE TAM. It needs to be completed prior to any remote proctoring to ensure both teachers and student devices are working as expected. Testing ticket information will need to be communicated to students, as well as guidance for how to appropriately destroy the information if it was printed. Okay. And then again, training tests for all content areas that the student is going to test remotely and needs to also be completed. These charts describe the hardware and software requirements for the teacher's machine. Before testing, you'll need to ensure that they meet the minimum requirements necessary for remote testing. You can also use the RISE diagnostic tool that's linked here at the bottom for RISE test, which is really nice to see if the device itself is going to work for remote proctoring. For students needing to take a remote summative assessment, there is an online student field in the student test settings in TIDE. So all users will be able to see this field, but only users with either the school administrator role or an LEA user are going to be able to edit that. So this needs to be set per student as appropriate. So if it's set to yes, that little radial button, if it's filled in yes, the student is going to receive the remote testing tools. If it is unset or set to no, the student is going to receive the standard in-person test and tools. Similar to an in-person test, the proctor a remote session, you are going to select that option from the test administration tab from the RISE portal. But instead of using the yellow active sessions tab, you are going to use the pink upcoming sessions tab so that you can actually schedule your remote session. So to schedule the proctoring session, you're going to select the date. It's really easy. You just pick the date desired from the little calendar. And all of the test types, again, color-coded, very user-friendly in little drop-downs here. When you view these lists of assessments, if you're expecting to see one that doesn't appear, I would recommend checking your test windows because that could be influencing which tests appear and which ones don't appear in your drop-down. This important warning box will appear when you select any summative test, again, remote or otherwise, to administer, and you have to type in summative to move forward. Once you verify that, yes, you are planning to administer a summative test, you will want to verify which tests you've selected. If you see here, I've selected remote summative, but I could have used the little add feature to specifically select the content and grade specific for like ELA 6, but I've named my session as well here in the right below the test selected. It says remote test session, but you could instruct proctors to reflect like a teacher name, the type of test, the content area and grade. It's not necessary, but it does make it easier for you in reporting to kind of sort things out if you have a general guidance for the session name. But once you've made the necessary selections, you can save your session. The session information pop-up is going to appear, and this pop-up window provides the session ID teachers need to share with students so that students can then join the session when it starts. So this information should not be shared over unsecured communication methods like personal email or a text message. Instead, teachers need to communicate this information to students using a secure method, such as a classroom management system or Encrypted emails are also appropriate as long as students are familiar with how to access information once it's been encrypted. Okay. This is one of those reasons you'll want to conduct a training test using the remote format prior to your summative administration, because then your teacher and your students can also be familiar with this pre-communication piece. Okay. I see a couple of other things in the chat. Creating these test sessions from remote can be done days before, correct? Yes. You'll just want to do these, the process I just talked about, actually, with the scheduling, not the creating, if that makes sense. Because you're going to schedule it and it will only go live during the date and time frame that you've set. Is setting that the student will be testing remotely set by the LEA or by the proctor? Stacy, that is only allowable by a school administrator or higher. So a school admin can do it or an LEA admin can do it. Teachers will not have the functionality available to set remote, but they can view it. They can tell you whether or not the student has that setting applied yet. Okay. If a teacher needs to, they can modify sessions that were scheduled in advance but have not started yet. So for example, a teacher might want to modify a session after it was created just to change the start or end date. To do this, they just access the RISE Test Administration site, and then the options for editing or even deleting the session are there available to them. For students signing in on their devices in a remote setting with a secure browser, they use the very same login interface displayed within the RISE Secure Browser that an in-person student would do. They log in with their first name, their SSID, and the session ID, which should have been previously and securely provided to them, okay? They will verify their personal information, and then they have to select the required test. And at this point, they are going to still be awaiting for approval from the teacher before beginning. Okay, once they're approved, they'll complete the same series of audio-visual checks that they would have also if they were in person. But once a remote session has started and students have joined, things are going to look a little bit different because of the communication tools. So teachers can communicate with all students using the broadcast feature by selecting that megaphone. The teacher can also type a message and then select the send icon, which will then automatically appear on the screen of every single student in their session. Just know though, because we all know that students love to use a text or chat feature, it might be helpful to remind students that they don't need to individually reply to the broadcast message unless it's requested to do so, because students can respond to messages from the teacher just by typing a message in that little chat box. So when a student sends a message waiting icon is then going to appear under their image on the test administration site. The teacher just selects the student's image to view. As with most applications, selecting the X to close the pop-up window will happen there. I say mention to students what your communication expectations are beforehand, so you don't end up with multiple responses to respond to on your broadcast message, unless that's really your heart's desire. But you will have so many little blinking dots if you are expecting them to respond to your broadcast message, because it's going to be individual to you when it was a group message that you had created to begin with to them. But they can't reply as a group. Students will still need to be approved for entry. You can do this with the check mark or the approve all button. While students are testing off-site, teachers can observe video of all students at once in low resolution. On this screen, you can see that little circle, or you can select a student to view at high resolution if they select the student video icon for the student that they want to view, okay? Now, if needed, teachers can actually start a one-on-one video conference as well. So during a video conference, teachers can see and hear the student, and if the teacher allows, the student can see and hear the teacher. They do this by selecting the student video icon from the student that they want to speak with, and the video conference pop-up window is going to open. It's going to display that high resolution video of the student that we just looked at, but you can take it one step further by selecting the call icon to then be able to speak with the student directly. And once that call is initiated on the teacher's device, a pop-up window is going to display a little split screen view of the teacher and the student. So on the student's device, the window displays automatically, displaying that same split screen view of you and your student, and teachers can then toggle their webcam and their microphone on or off using the buttons displayed at the top of the window. They can also disconnect the call with the button at the bottom, just like you would see on your cell phone probably. Students who need assistance can request it from their teacher as well by virtually raising their hand. So when they do this, they will appear at the top of the class list, making it easy to monitor your proctoring dashboard. Teachers can then respond to students' requests by assistance with either initiating the chat or the video like we just went over. You can also lower the student's hand once your communication is complete. If a student's question requires a teacher to be able to view the student's screen, there is also screen sharing functionality. So the teacher will need to select the view icon and the student will be then prompted to give permission for the teacher to view their screen. Once the student specifies which screen they want to share, a red dashed border is going to appear around the student's screen and the teacher will then be able to see the student's screen. There are two ways that you can end screen sharing. The student can either select the stop sharing button that appears on their screen, or the teacher can select the end icon in the video conferencing window on their screen. Just like in an in-person session, test alerts appear on the list of students if the RISE testing system has not detected any activity from the student for a while. So this might happen if a student's computer's gone to sleep or if the student is experiencing some sort of interruption. In the event of a test alert, all student responses are saved, so there's no concern that the student's going to lose any of their testing data, but students with test alerts are automatically moved to a test with potential issues list at the top of the page, and you can then choose to respond in a myriad of ways. You can either select the student video icon for the student and see what might be going on in the environment. You can then also send them a chat or initiate a one-on-one video if it's needed. Anything like that would be great to handle if a student requires additional assistance. But before we look at the test interface from a student perspective here, I also want to draw your attention to the global tools and other features that are available for all students to use during testing. So we're going to look at these tools and features in detail on the following slides, but know that the list of global tools are available for every single student. Okay. The assistive technology tools, however, require state approval. Again, any questions on those need to be directed to our special education specialist, Jessica Wilhelm. Okay, I've also listed here the assistive technology manual, which will link you to even further guidance for those tools. So the following interface information, again, for all users, not just remote users, this is for everybody. You'll notice there are arrows in the top left, which are there for students to use when advancing back and forth between questions. And the other available tools appear in the upper right, with some in a collapsible hamburger style menu on the question or cluster itself. The notepad appears in the item-specific hamburger dropdown. Students can use this notepad to make notes about an item. Okay, the notepad is item-specific, so students can only access their notes for a question when they are on that question's test page. The notes tool is not item-specific. Anything students type into this section are going to be available throughout the entire test. Okay, these notes are saved. They also continue to be accessed later in other segments if it's a segmented test. Notes are also retained if the student logs out of the test and resumes later. All right. Also with those notes sections, note that if students use any profanity or alarming language, you'll probably get an email from Scott Ross Kelly. Emily, sorry. You'll get it from Emily. But then you'll probably get to talk to Scott. To use the highlighter tool, you can either select the desired text and then right-click and click Highlight Section, or you can find it in the item-specific hamburger drop-down menu with the stimulus, okay? To remove the highlighting, students have to then right-click the area and select the Reset Highlighting button that pops up. If a student pauses the test, any highlights made before pausing are also retained and saved. Students can use the strike-through tool to help them visually eliminate answers that they believe are incorrect or that they want to ignore. To do this, they will right-click on the text of the answer they want to mark and then click strike-through. The answer text will then display a line through it. To remove the strike-through, they right-click and choose the undo strike-through button that pops up. It's important to note, though, that striking through answers doesn't necessarily indicate a response to the question. Students are still going to have to select a response to answer it. Also, applying the strike-through tool does not prevent the student from selecting that answer. Okay. Another element of the online test, which is helpful for students, is the mark for review feature. Because as they go through the test, they are required to answer each question on the screen before they can move on. Um, so they should really provide what they think is the best answer, but if they're unsure, they can mark that item or other items with the little flag to review them before submitting. Okay, so to mark an item for review, you'll use, again, the little hamburger drop-down menu for the item, select mark for review, and then the item number will display a little dog-eared corner and a small flag. So at any time during a test segment, students can go back to those marked items and review or change their answers if needed. To unmark an item, they can choose from that same drop-down menu and then select unmark review item. Note that once a student has completed a test segment in a test that prohibits navigation to previous segments, or if the test is paused for more than 20 minutes, returning to the items marked for review is not allowed. So it is absolutely not encouraged to answer quickly and click through just to see how many questions are on a test or something like that, because if they need to then go back and review, that has to be done within that session. So it's definitely better to encourage your students to respond to the item with awareness to what the item is asking and to respond to in the best way that they know how before marking for review. Okay. Just also know though that 20-minute rule does not necessarily apply to cluster style questions. Okay. But this is why there is a 5-minute warning in the scripting, because it's going to give some time for those students to review those items that they've marked for review before they come back tomorrow, because then they won't be able to see it anymore. Okay. If you have more questions regarding the pause here with whether it be a cluster item itself or like what students can see or not see after that 20 minutes, feel free to reach out to me with an email, or it's also included in the RISE TAM with pretty detailed guidance there. During testing, students can use the zoom feature to increase the size of text as well as graphics. An English glossary feature is available for students to use for ELA in grades 3 through 5 on those reading passages and items during testing. The students can access the glossary by clicking any of the pre-selected terms which are indicated on the screen by a gray dotted outline. When the student hovers their mouse over that term, it's going to highlight in blue. So if the student clicks a highlighted term, a pop-up box is going to appear with a definition for them. The masking tool allows students to cover up a distracting area of the test page. They can click the masking button and then click and drag their mouse to select a rectangular area on the screen. And once they've covered the portion they want to cover, they will need to deactivate masking mode by clicking the masking button again. Those masked areas, though, they will remain masked on the screen even after masking mode is deactivated. If you need to remove a masked area, the students will click in the X in the upper right-hand corner and it will remove it for them. The Select Previous Version tool allows students to view and restore responses that they previously entered and saved for a text response item. To use this tool, students open the menu for a text response item and click Select Previous Version. This is generally used most regularly on the writing assessment that's administered to grades 5 and 8. Okay, a window is going to appear listing any saved responses for the item and the text associated with each one. To view those previous responses, they can select the response version in that left panel, and then they can read and review the associated text in the right panel. To restore one of those responses, the student would then click Select at the bottom of the window, and the selected response will appear in the answer area for the item. But please note that the Select Previous Version tool cannot restore responses that were entered prior to pausing if it were an item on a test that wasn't a writing assessment. Our last global tool is one I hit on earlier in the training, but if a student has the Spanish adaptive version on the math or science test enabled and tied, this global icon will appear with the other global tools in the upper right area of the screen, and the student can then use the button as a toggle tool to change the presented language between English and Spanish. But again, this tool is only available to students who have had that setting applied through their student test settings. If your school plans to test over multiple days, you may need to have students pause their tests at a certain point so that they can resume testing at another time. You may also allow a pause if students were taking a break from testing, just like a quick stretch break, or if they need to leave their room. Whether they've been instructed to do so or not, students can actually pause their test at any time just by clicking the pause button in the upper left corner of the screen. When it comes to pausing tests, there are some rules that apply. So for all tests that have been paused for less than 20 minutes, students can actually return from a short break in testing and revisit any items in that current segment. They can change their answers if desired. They can do all of their marking for review. Okay, students taking all tests, again, except writing, who've paused their test longer for 20 minutes, are only going to be able to return to the most recently visited page, though. So if you're longer than 20 minutes, it kind of closes what's already been completed, unless it's writing. That one they can always return to. They can change any answers on the present page, but they're not going to be able to answer items on previous pages if it was paused for more than 20 minutes. Okay. If all items on the most recently visited page were actually answered prior to pausing, the student is going to resume the test on the next page with unanswered items, and they will not be allowed to access previous pages or segments of the test. This happened fairly regularly at the beginning of like science clusters because a student would respond to all of the items. And then when they came back the next day, they thought that they had skipped questions because they finished on like item 3, but when they came back the next day, it started them on item 4. And maybe they felt like they weren't finished responding, but if they have responded or filled things in, the system is going to assume that they are finished and bump them to the next one. So if a student is in the middle of a testing cluster and they are getting towards the end of a testing session, it is better to have them pause it right there and leave things incomplete because it's going to still keep them there on the next day, or give them a little extended time. Like if you're in a secondary setting, say, all right, I'll write you a note to your next class, hang out here for the next 5 minutes and get it finished before it moves them on. Okay. But again, writing tests can be revisited at any time prior to their submission. Okay. On a related note, as a security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are actually going to be logged out and their tests are going to be paused automatically. So inactivity is determined by whether or not the student is interacting with the test by selecting answers or using navigation tools. Clicking in empty space on the screen is not considered activity. Okay, so students are going to receive a warning message prior to being logged out, and they do need to click OK on that pop-up within 60 seconds to avoid the automatic log out and pausing of their test. If a student's test is paused, though, due to this inactivity, the same rules apply as when the student intentionally paused the test. The student can just log back into the test again and resume from the point where the test was interrupted, again, though, subject to that pause rule. Something to be aware of specific to the Math 6 test is it has 2 segments. When students reach the end of the first segment, they will receive a warning message asking them to confirm that they want to move on to the second segment. The warning also advises that they cannot return to change their answers in that first segment once they've moved on. So proctors should ensure that students understand the outcome of ending the test segment and encourage students to check their answers before moving on, especially if they have something marked for review. Okay. The proctor will then need to approve the student again before they can enter that second segment because it is the one that is going to include the calculator global tool for the standard that allows students to use a calculator. When students have responded to all of the items within the test, they will click the next button and they will be presented with the congratulations, you've reached the end of the test screen. Okay. Students will then have the choice to either review their answers and submit their test. But if their ability to review and change answers, again, subject to the pause rule, if it's applicable, they can still do that. Go back and take time to review before they submit. This is also a great time to have some set procedures in place. For example, we have observed schools where students are instructed to notify the teacher before submission. That's fine. Okay, the TAM has specific directions though for ending tests. So if you have a click happy kiddo who submits a writing test before they're finished, it can be reopened with a test appeal, but you'll want to do that really, really fast before it goes for scoring. Okay. To end a test with a remote proctoring, it is similar. I see a question in the chat. Can they submit if not If can they submit it if not answered all questions? Christine, they can't even move forward in the test if they haven't answered. So if I'm on question 3 and I don't know how to answer and I want to skip it, I actually have to answer it before it lets me move on to question number 4. But if I want to be able to return back to it, I can use that mark for review feature to remind me that I wanted to relook at question 3 because I didn't know the answer. Does that help? Yep, perfect. Yeah, a student will not be able to submit through RISE a blank item, test item, like they can in Utah Aspire Plus. So after a remote session has ended, or once an individual student logs out of the session, teachers and students will no longer be able to see or communicate with each other through that RISE system for remote ones, okay? So guidance needs to be provided to your students prior to ending, since no communication within RISE is going to occur once a student submits their test. In person, I can still talk to my kiddos, okay? In a remote setting, that piece is gone when they've hit submit. Okay, I can't talk to them anymore. So it's highly, again, recommended that teachers and students use the training test to practice using that technology built in for communication. Also, as a note here, stopping a session automatically, again, logs out all students and pauses their tests if they weren't finished. So even with remote sessions, materials considered secure do need to be stored securely between assessment sessions or destroyed, like the completion of a testing ticket, or if they're using scratch paper. Those are things that if you are a remote proctor, you need to be thinking ahead about when communicating with your students. Because again, once the communication tools are gone, you don't have access to them to tell them that they need to shred their graph paper or their scratch paper. Okay, so make sure that is done beforehand. With that, are there any questions on how to administer the test, whether it be general administration or remote administration, or the global tools that are provided for students? Know that from this point on, we are looking at reporting and like cleanup test, end of test experiences. So if you have something related specifically to testing, this is a great time to ask it. Or if something has crept up in your brain with questions regarding TIDE, that's fine too. If not, we'll move on to reporting and how to access those. So if students are taking an excessive amount of time, how do test administrators get students to finish the test, or do they just save and have them close? What can they say or can't say? Derek, that's a great question. So excessive amounts of time. RISE itself is not timed per se. We do have a suggested, right? Suggested completion window of time. But if a student is still actively, motivationally working through items, they should still be allowed to do so. If a student is refusing to test or finish, there is a participation code that you can enter for that. I can't remember what one it is off the top of my head.
Student refused.
But there is a student refused to finish. And if that occurs, you can enter that participation code, but know that RISE is going to automatically submit the items that they did respond to for scoring. And if I remember correctly for accountability, Brittany will have to correct me though if that's incorrect. I believe they have to respond to at least 6 items for it to be countable for accountability. But you could reach out to her with that question if you need to. If a student doesn't finish a test, should we enter a code? Christine, in my opinion, I would only enter a code if it were in that less than 6 item range, whether it be because they were absent for the remainder of the window or they refused to test. Brittany, magical, she added it. 106 is the participation code for a student refused to test. Just more that the further the kid gets through, the more data you are going to have back. So the more items they respond to, the more reporting you have. So I would only enter a code if they truly aren't going to come back and finish. But know that if they have attempted, they will get reports. The 85% for the score is for Utah Aspire Plus. 6 items for RISE. Okay, there we go. Eric's clarifying. 6 items to count as an attempt, 85% for the score. Is 6 the rule for interim as well? Chrissy, that's a great question too. I'm not sure the answer of. Eric, do you know what the rule would be for an attempt and a score for interims? Okay.
Yeah, I have to look that up because the interims are shorter, so there's a percentage that goes into it for our psychometric team. So I would have to look on that.
Awesome. If you're willing to check on that, and you can just drop it in the chat, even if we have an answer, that'd be great.
Sure.
Awesome. Any other questions before we moved on to reporting? These are great questions. Does look like the chat slowed down a bit. All right, so for reporting, this is where you are going to find your student results. Okay, when you log into the reporting system for RISE, the first thing you see is the dashboard where you can view overall assessment results for all of your assessments. And the dashboard generator is going to allow you as the user to determine which types or test groups that you want to actually start with. So you can see there's benchmarks, interims, and summatives available here. Okay, the screen is also going to allow for quick searching for a specific SSID, as well as changing various settings in the features and tools menu, just like changing reporting time period to look at historical RISE data. That's probably the one you'll use the most regularly. You can also download student results as well as other functionality here. But once you've selected the test groups, any relevant settings, you'll just click the Go to Dashboard button at the bottom to proceed. And the selections that you've chosen can be changed at any time by using the dashboard generator link again that's at the top left of the screen. And you can reset those anytime you want to. It's important to note that the teacher dashboard and the admin or LEA dashboard do look slightly different, but users can see overall test results directly from that dashboard page. This screen also shows the filters panel to the left of the tables. It is expanded currently to show the options available to you as the user, but if you're not initially seeing the information you believe you should be seeing, check your filters because oftentimes it's because these are set to view a specific data set and it could be excluding what you're looking for. So just double check these if you're not seeing something that you expect to see. You can view performance by roster or by student using the tabs across the top. We're going to start with roster and move on to student here in a little bit. The first 2 fields will show the course and the teacher. The next columns show the student count, so that's the number of students who took each test, the completion rate, which is how many students are currently finished, the average score, performance distribution, as well as the percent proficient. You can use the gray triangles across the top to sort by student count, completion rate, as well as scale score if you choose to. Because summative assessments have reporting category sections, you can compare the performance of your schools in each reporting category. You just click each of those colored little vertical section bars to expand or collapse it. In this example, though, you can view a performance distribution bar for each roster under the reporting category. So when making comparisons, though, just be careful to take student count into consideration to determine just the value of the comparison that you are making. For summative assessments, you can also view strength and weakness designations for reporting categories in that performance by roster tab. The strength and weakness designations compare an individual school's performance on a specific standard with the overall performance on the test. So on each line, the comparison is relative to the individual student and utilizes various symbols to provide a quick overview of the performance itself. So it's important to note that performance by item cannot be seen at any level with a summative test. Okay, users can only see strength and weakness at aggregate levels for the summative. Okay, we don't have item level specific data for summative. If you are interested in item level specific data, I do talk about that in the benchmark and interim training that we hold in the fall. If a plus sign is shown, it's an area of strength. If an equals sign is shown, it's performance on that standard, meaning that it's similar to performance on the test as a whole. If a negative sign is shown, it's an area of weakness. If there's an asterisk, though, it means that there is insufficient information to provide that feedback at this time. So this information can also be accessed on a more granular level by teachers for their own rosters and students assigned specifically to them. But when reviewing performance by student, the first two fields are going to show the students' names and the SSIDs. The next column, again, shows the scale scores, performance distribution, and the percent proficient. You'll notice those same colored vertical section bars are going to expand and provide more information that pertains to that particular standard. One of the other features included in the waffle menu is the breakdown by button. And this allows you to compare performance by various groups that are represented here. So you can make selections and then move down to the download student results to export that information to either a PDF, a zip, or CSV format. And that is going to go to your secure file center when it's ready. It does take a few minutes for that to show up there though. So just kind of be patient with it and refresh your screen in a few minutes to get any of that downloadable data. The download student results box is also where you can print your ISRs that need to be provided to parents within 3 weeks of test completion. Okay. You can print from that same screen if you choose to. Summative assessments cover multiple reporting categories. Okay. So when you click the little eye icon, this performance level table is going to show up. It will also show the range for the scale score, which correlate to the proficiency level. And it's important to note here that with these scale scores, because it's marked, it's possible to compare, the scale score makes it possible to compare one student's score to another student's score, even when they didn't respond to the same items, which is what we use since RISE Summative is adaptive and not all students are answering the same sets of questions. I see in the chat, ISRs are created as soon as students submit their test credits. Yes, for RISE, you are getting immediate feedback. And so you can print those as soon as they're available to you. These scale scores are the same from year to year, with the exceptions of when we go through standard setting for a new test. But just know that there is a slide deck in the resources section of the RISE portal. If you'd like more information regarding those cut scores for subjects and grades, again, it's important to note here that if you want those, whoops, I skipped a slide. There we go. If you want that feedback, double check the cut scores, okay? The scale score is going to also give you the performance distribution by proficiency. So proficiency levels describe how students applied the content-specific knowledge with the skills outlined in the Utah core, and that's going to then correlate to the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we tend to see, okay? When reviewing and interpreting students' score information for RISE summative writing, here are a couple of things to note, okay? There are 2 categories now that student responses are scored on for writing. You have composition and conventions. Know that the scale score range varies across writing prompts because the difficulty of the writing prompts also varies. The individual student report is also going to identify the genre of the writing prompt that the student received, as well as the report itself. But due to item security, specific information about which writing prompt the student responded to is not available, okay? But to access rubric scores, teachers can review the individual reports for their students. If you have questions on the new writing scoring, feel free at any time to reach out to Dallas Brooks or Megan Lopez, our ELA specialists, and they can answer any specific or more nuanced questions that you may have when it comes to the new writing scoring. Okay, so new last year, CAI implemented improved writing reporting with the summative test. So users can now see what's called the writing dimension reporting data at the individual student level directly in reporting. And this is going to provide you with more granular details on the points that students are receiving in each of the writing domains. This will also display if a student receives a condition code. Okay, condition codes are used when a traditional score can't be entered for the student's writing response. This chart, along with other information regarding condition codes, is going to be provided in the RISE reporting guide. It is currently being updated right now with this information. But again, you can reach out to our specialists if you have specific questions regarding scoring or the condition codes. I see in the chat, will auto scoring be immediate or will it be in the past with a certain number of writing to be submitted first? I believe there still have to be 500 tests submitted for human scoring first. Eric, is that correct? Yes, perfect. And then after that, it will go to the automated scoring. If you need to generate and view or export the ISR for the writing assessment, you will do that from the Download Student Results button under the Features and Tools waffle menu. Each ISR is going to show the student's performance on their writing assessment individually. Okay. You'll just select the desired filtering options that you want for that particular writing assessment, then select student section. It contains the list of rosters. So I can actually either select an entire roster or a selection of students from the list, or I can just enter a specific SSID into the search bar if I only need to generate one of the ISRs. From the two report type options in the panel on the left, there's two of those for ISRs. The selections section shows the number of ISRs to be generated, and then more options are going to appear below that. But if you're generating multiple ISRs, under report format, you can choose either single PDF for all of the ISRs, or you can choose the zip file, which will contain a separate PDF for each one of those. Okay, if you select single PDF, the student results generator might create a zip file of multiple PDFs, just depending on the number of school or grades or opportunities that are included. But under PDF type, you can select either simple or detailed as well. And then you just click generate. Once the ISR generation is finished, the inbox will have your summative writing ISRs available for you to download. Okay. Do we have any questions on RISE reporting before we move on to the things that you have to do as an LEA user, like test appeals and the cleanup process, as it were? Any questions on reports? Hey, if there are no questions on reporting, we will move on to the test appeals process. So a test appeal request is a way of kind of interrupting the normal flow of test submissions for reporting. So for example, a student might need to go back into a segment they incorrectly exited, or maybe a grace period extension needs to be applied if they had to pause their test and didn't have time to review. This is actually a great one to do if you fall into the situation where there was a fire drill and so the teacher paused everything really quickly, but they didn't get back into the classroom within that 20-minute period window so that students could review. A grace period extension could be awarded to those students so that they still have the opportunity to go back and review the items that may have been fallen subject now to that pause rule. Okay. A test administrator might want to invalidate a test because of an issue with academic dishonesty. A student might have completed a test without issue, but then maybe they obtained a parental exclusion after the fact, therefore requiring the test to be invalidated now. All of these situations require test appeals. So to create a test appeal request, you'll need to log into Tide and know that these have to be submitted at least a day prior to the end of your test window if the student is still expected to complete the opportunity. Okay. Once the appeal has been requested, LEA level users need to go in and review those to either approve or reject them. So there are a myriad of test appeals to choose from. And as you're deciding which type of appeal to create or review, it's important to understand that if you invalidate a test, it eliminates the test opportunity completely. It's not coming back. Okay, it will no longer appear as an opportunity for the student. So be familiar with these descriptions when creating those when it comes to approving or denying them. Also know that reopening a summative test after it's gone for reporting is not allowable. The reopening of a test is generally reserved for like an expired interim assessment or a writing benchmark that may have expired and the student didn't have time to complete it in the 7-day allotment and wants to continue. Okay, so reopening is not for summative assessments. To create an appeal request, you just select create request and you'll be able to select a request type. You'll then need to search for the student using one of these three options. The search type determines what test opportunities appear in your search results there. The session ID is going to find all of the students who tested in that session. Result ID is going to find an individual student's results on one test opportunity, and SSID is going to allow you to find any eligible tests for one student based on the appeal type that you've selected. You'll then just mark the checkbox for each of the results that you want the appeal applied to. From the select a reason option there, from that drop down, you'll need to select, so you need to like type in a reason for the appeal request to be made. And reasons are going to vary based on the appeal type. But enter a reason for the request in the window that pops up. It probably goes without saying that because is not an appropriate one to approve. We see it if a teacher does a test request and they put because, please reach out to them for, asking for more information, because I'm not going to say that it's wrong, the test appeal is invalid, because it could very well be valid, but they need to provide you with significantly more information. So for example, a reason for the request might be a parental exclusion form was submitted, so this test needs to be invalidated. No question about what is happening there. Okay. Make sure there's enough detail that you feel comfortable and confident either rejecting or approving the request based on the reason provided. And if you have questions on what would be a great reason to deny or approve a request, you can reach out to Scott or I, and we can also be thought partners in that with you if it's needed. Again, as an LEA user, you then have to approve or reject that appeal. A teacher can create the appeal, but they cannot go in and approve it themselves. That's for you. That's your call to make. Okay. For what it's worth, you can also view, retract, and export any existing appeal requests if you need to. But from the appeals request task menu on the Tide dashboard, you'll select view or export requests and then click the all button. Okay, you can do the components individually, but I like the all feature because then it allows me to review everything at once in one view. After you've completed your desired search options, you will be able to view your results. Retrieve the appeals requests you want to view by filling out the search criteria and select search. I would just strongly encourage you to review the reason for the appeal request by selecting that little arrow, the down arrow button as it appears between the kebab menu and the SSID. Because even for myself, things changed and I had to reach out to Eric and ask how I could view the reason. Because once upon a time, the reason would appear with a little comment button and you would click on that. But now to view the reason for a test appeal, you have to click that little down arrow and information will populate below that with more information for you. I see in the chat, if a student tested and the parent filled out an exclusion form after, can I just go in and enter the appropriate participation code, or does an appeal request have to be submitted? So Ashley, you'll need to go in and enter the participation code, the 214, and then you'll need to go in here and have the test invalidated so that the report no longer shows. So when you go to these to approve the appeals, you select the appeal to be approved and then click the process button when you're ready. You'll follow the very same procedure if you're rejecting or retracting an appeal as well. Please note, this is a two-step procedure. And a lot of times I see that the appeal is created within the system, but then the approval process hasn't been completed. To finish the appeal, the requests have to be reviewed and then processed. I would recommend checking for appeals at least weekly during your benchmark and interim windows. But during your summative test window, you're going to want to check this multiple times a day. But do know that if you fall behind or if you forget, I do check these every Friday and I will send you a little friendly reminder to go in and either approve or reject those as I see them come in as well. The reason I say you want to keep checking these even right now during your benchmark and interim window is there are people who are submitting test appeals to have interim tests reopened because it expired, because after 14 days, the student can no longer log in to complete it. It has to be reopened for them in this manner. The same is for a writing benchmark. Those actually expire in 7 days. So if the student starts it on a Monday, and then they're either sick or absent for the remainder of the week, if they don't log right back in the following Monday, that is going to expire on their end and they can't log in to finish. So you'll want to be checking these periodically throughout. Okay, like I said, right now, you can probably get away with checking it weekly, but when it comes to summative tests, when that window opens for you, you want to be checking multiple times a day, in case there are things that need to be addressed in a more timely manner than a couple of days later. It's important to monitor test progress and also enter participation codes throughout the test window because as testing progresses, things get busier. You don't want to wait to do that until everything is complete. After testing is done, LEA level users actually are going to use Tide to clean up their data using the data cleanup menu in that blue section, that blue after testing section on the Tide dashboard. So in the data cleanup menu, the discrepancy resolution page allows LEA level users to view and clean up test discrepancies where students were eligible for a test in a given school year, but didn't take the test. LEA level users can clean up this data by entering participation codes as applicable for students who appear on the discrepancy resolution reports. This is another reason you want to be checking your rosters right now, because if you have students who you've expected to fall off rosters but haven't, they're actually going to appear on your discrepancy resolution page, and it's going to require more work on your end to determine which participation code is applicable to their situation. So if you're doing those now and making sure that your rosters are clean now, your data cleanup process in the end becomes much more streamlined. To do this, you're first going to fill out the fields given and then hit search. The results of the search are going to be generated showing the students within the search criteria with discrepancies. For example, those who were eligible to test and didn't. So if they were absent and it wasn't completed, things like that, and a participation code hadn't been added yet, you'll then select the tools icon button to resolve the discrepancy. Okay, that resolve discrepancy page is going to appear after you hit that little tool, the little wrench icon. You can select the little edit pencil to assign a participation code to the student that's listed in that row, and then the assign non-participation code page is going to appear. You're going to use the drop-down menu given to assign the appropriate code, and then click Save when complete. And a confirmation screen is going to then appear confirming that you have entered that code, okay, and that it has then been resolved. Again, as a reminder, you should be entering participation codes for students throughout the testing window. You don't want to wait until after because it just makes a lot more work for you. Okay, your LEA level users should talk to your school administrators and teachers in their LEA about this process and set up some communication channels for this information to be relayed. Because if you're waiting until after testing to clean up this testing data, you should be using the reports here in the data cleanup section of Tide 2 weeks prior to the test window closing for your LEA or school. Okay. As a reminder, all participation codes do need to be submitted by, I want to say it's June 12th, because that's the week after the window closes, but Eric can drop in the chat if I am inaccurate. But everything has to be done by that cutoff date. And like I said, I believe it's June 12th. But again, it's best to just continue to do this as you go through. Just like when you're doing any cleanup around your house, the more you address it, the little things throughout, the easier it's going to be at the end. Okay.
I would add
When
a
it
plug
comes, oh, go for it.
to when your students start exiting Tide as well, it becomes much more difficult to do cleanup. So if possible, don't exit your students until you're done with cleanup to the extent that you're able.
Yes, absolutely. So we see this a lot because the window will close and things are still available there, but maybe your school year has ended, which means your kids have exited Tide. Don't wait until that happens. Just because they're there doesn't mean they'll always be there. You want to get these things taken care of before your course end date, because that is when your students are going to exit Tide. Okay. When it comes to adding participation codes, LEA level users can add participation codes for multiple students in a single upload if you want to. Okay, you'll need to enter all SSIDs and their corresponding participation codes into an Excel or CSV from a template. It's downloadable here from Tide, and you can actually upload the entire file into Tide in one action. Just please note that this task does require some familiarity with composing CSV files and working within Microsoft Excel. More guidance is included in the Rise Tide user guide if you want to, but I'm going to outline the process here as well. You're just going to select the option from the menu and the upload page will appear. An example of when this could be a good time to use is for your absent students. If you had a list of 68 students who were absent and not testing, you can do all of them with a 101 in this one action rather than clicking on them individually if you choose to. So you'll upload your file with the SSIDs and their corresponding participation codes. If you've not saved the file on your device, you will need to download one, just like any other Tide upload file. The template upload file is pre-configured with the RISE assessments and the applicable participation codes to make it easier to fill out. You'll just take some time once you've uploaded there to preview the file, but any errors in the upload file are going to be flagged in a little validation step. Just know that a common error as seen here occurs when trying to apply a participation code to a test that a student is not actually eligible to take. These errors will need to be fixed and you'll need to upload the revised file with those changes reflected for it to clear and all be done. Okay, but it's a really easy way to do it if you're doing like a bulk upload situation with one particular participation code, or you can do multiples. Just make sure that you're paying really close attention to the participation codes that you're entering in that respect. Are there questions for test appeals or data cleanup? Again, these two tasks are really more geared towards your LEA level user, although a school administrator can approve test appeals if needed, depending on what role you've assigned them. When it comes to the RISE help desk, their hours of operation are basically when you'll be in school with a little time after Monday through Friday, but also know that the summative window hours do change. Okay. They are so kind to open up to us 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. if we are within the summative administration windows. When it comes to the contacting the RISE help desk, there is a chat feature. There is an email option. There's also a phone number that you can call. You're also welcome to reach out to USBE at any time with any questions, but also know we have other responsibilities that are going on during summative testing. Sometimes we're even in your buildings, which is great if you need help then, but it's not so great if you're in another building and you need our help because we might not be available. So I would say if you run into an issue during a testing session and you require immediate assistance, always reach out to the RISE help desk first and see if they can provide that assistance for you. The nice thing is, if it's something that requires assistance from USBE, the RISE help desk will tell you that. They'll say, we can help you with this and this and this, but now you'll need to reach out to USBE with this particular request, which is kind of nice because they know exactly what they can do for helping and support, and they also know what we have to do to help and support. I've also created this slide for you, which provides our email addresses and what we do, although I will say there is a typo with Scott's, so don't use the link. But you can reach out to Scott Ross Kelly with one S at any time. Two S's, you're not going to get very far. But also know, I put here, Maureen handles all of our rostering. If you have any rostering specific questions, you can reach out to her directly. If you have any questions regarding accommodations, you can reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist, directly. And then any questions with testing windows or testing ethics, you can reach out to Scott with one S, Ross Kelly. Not two, just one. And we can answer any questions you have that either come up after this training, or if something, again, is more nuanced to your building, we're happy to respond to those. But with that, friends, you are free and released from the attendance here of the training if you're good to go. However, I am happy to stay on for as long as you need. We've even scheduled this for the next 20 minutes or so here. I always give a little cushion window so that you can drop any questions in the chat if there's something specific that you'd like. You are so welcome. Thank you so much for participating. Your questions are great. Grant, general question. If a student has withdrawn from your LEA and does not show a new enrollment, do you need to pursue them for testing?
No, they should not be there. If they are not enrolled in your LEA, you are not responsible for their testing.
There we go. They're not enrolled. But if you have an SSID that you want checked, you can reach out to Maureen and see if they maybe are enrolled somewhere else. She can check that for you. Derek, another question. For writing tests, do students need to meet all components of a section of the rubric to receive that score? That is a great question for Dallas or Megan. If they're online listening, they can type that for you or come off of mute. Can students get a higher score by having a higher quantity of words, even if the quality is low? Again, Derek, those are great questions for our ELA specialists. Christy, did we find out if the 6 rule applies to interim? Yes, perfect. Eric had put that up there above. And Megan or Dallas, if you're still online and want to drop the answer in the chat for Derek, or if you're, we can also have Emily make you a co-host and you could come off mute. Or if you'd rather they just send you an email with those questions, we can do that too. Derek, I'll drop their emails in the chat just in case they don't come off of mute. Okay, Dallas, you should be good.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. Sorry, I was trying to answer the question and I was like, I can't talk. Okay, so for your question, Derek, for the first question, no, students do not need to meet all components of that section of the rubric. It's more of a best fit scenario. So there might be something that the student didn't do in that bucket, and that's okay as long as that's the best fit for that bucket for the student to receive that score. And for your second question, no, students cannot get a higher score only for having a higher quantity of words. So word count is not taken into consideration. We're looking at the composition of the student's writing. So their word count, it doesn't matter what it is. Typically, if students are writing better, they are getting higher word counts, but we did not take that into consideration on the rubric at all. So we're not looking at word counts. Please let me know if that answered your questions. If not, I am happy to try to give more answers, or like Elise said, you can always shoot me an email. Okay, looks like that answered it. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Dallas. Anything else? If a student completed 8 items and then refused to finish, does it auto-submit or does it need to be submitted? Chrissy, a test that a student has started, even with only a couple of items, is going to auto-submit at the end of the session. Just know that your reporting is then going to delay that long as well. Does that make sense? So if it's sitting and waiting, it's going to be when your window closes, when the testing window closes. So like June 5th or 6th this year is when it will auto submit. But if the student obviously goes through and submits it themselves, you'll get your immediate scoring. But you will have to wait if a student doesn't complete the test for that auto submit to go through, which happens at the end of the first week. And Eric just dropped in the chat. Usually the June date happens first, the June 5th, or it will auto submit if it expires. But generally speaking, your testing window doesn't allow for a 60. Oh, for an interim? So an interim is going to auto submit after it expires, after it's 14 days. Yeah, after it expires for 14 days. And that's when, if the student does want to continue, if it was like they went on vacation or they were sick or the teacher completely forgot about it and didn't have the student continue when they came back, you can do a test appeal for the interim to have it reopened, and the student can then log back in and it will have it saved where they left off if they choose to continue. If the student's not going to continue and they just refuse, you can just let it go. You don't need to enter a participation code because it's not a summative assessment. It can just sit and die in reporting. It's fine. Anything else? These are great questions, friends. Even if it's something that's more nuanced to your building, because sometimes you have very specific questions, this is when you can do it without even having to worry about an email response. Not seeing people drop in the chat or enable their cameras. That's another really easy way for me to know if you have a question is to turn your video on. Doesn't look like it. So with that, again, thank you so much for your participation and thank you to our USBE colleagues and our partners with RISE for all your help and support in the chat. I really appreciate it and couldn't do it without you. This recording, again, it will be posted on our YouTube channel as soon as Emily is able to make it available. I hope to be able to provide the link for you at our AD meeting next week. If that's not allowed, if it's not ready by then, I will make sure that I put it in the AD memo that happens the following week. But with that, thank you so much. And Emily, I think we're good to go.